cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Easy Flow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartmann. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation and Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Tuesday. Thom Hartmann here with you. There is so much in the news. Is Tucker Carlson just trying to make us sick, or is he trying to make us hate each other, or is this some new ratings thing? Whatever, we're going to get into that. Miami school children in our second hour are joining the GOP death cult. We'll get into that. In the second hour, I've got a conversation to have with you about the hidden secret behind the Arizona ballot counting. Republicans are channeling, Joe Stalin's old saying, it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes. In our second hour, Julio Rivera is going to drop by, and he's going to, I think we're going to discuss this whole freak out that's happening down the right about Joe Biden doesn't want you eating meat, which, by the way, is not anything Joe Biden ever said or the Biden administration ever proposed, but it was an article in the Daily Mail, a British rag, and suddenly it became a thing over on Fox News. And in our second hour, what is it going to take to end slave patrol policing in America? The family of Andrew Brown Jr., the 42-year-old father who was apparently executed by police, is again speaking out. They've been allowed to see 20 seconds of the body camera footage. This is, shall we say, not right, at the very least. But like I said, I'm going to get into that in just a minute. But I want to start out with this whole bizarre situation that has to do with Tucker Carlson and Fox News. This is insane. You'll recall I've been saying for some time that, in my opinion, the Republican Party has been trying to prevent people or to encourage people not to wear masks simply to keep the virus circulating in America so that Joe Biden can't get the virus under control, so that he can't get the economy back, so that with a bad economy and a virus still out of control, Democrats will lose the election coming up in 2022 and will lose the White House in 2024. I see this as just cold political calculus. After all, these same guys were willing to kill 500,000 Americans just to open up the economy in September, October, and November so that they could all try to get elected. That backfired badly on them. The lesson that they learned, the Republicans, was that, hey, if you're the party in power and you've got a virus that's run out of control and an economy that's collapsing, you're going to lose. So now they're looking at this going, the Democrats are in power. And if we can keep this virus going and the economy collapsing, they're going to lose. And we'll get back into power. And won't that be a great thing? But now Tucker Carlson and Fox News have taken this a whole step farther. This is what he had to say, I believe it was last night, might have been the night before, on Fox News. He was talking about people who are wearing masks in public. Now, by the way, the CDC, sometime in the next hour or so, in fact, maybe they're doing it right now, are going to be releasing their new guidelines. And in all probability, they're going to say, if you're fully vaccinated, you probably don't need to wear a mask in public. But, that, which kind of adds to the conversation, I suppose, in a way. But it doesn't add at all to the conversation about what Carlson and Fox are trying to say, because this is where it gets very bizarre. He's speaking of people wearing masks. He says they're the aggressors. See, this is the whole pitch on the right, is you are the poor victims of these terrible people. So Tucker says they're the aggressors. It's our job to brush them back and restore the society we were born in. What is that? Is he still echoing his, black people and Jews are going to replace all the white people and Hispanics are going to replace the white voters in America? Is that, I don't know. But anyhow, so he continues, he says, so the next time you see somebody in a mask on a sidewalk or on a bike path, don't hesitate. Ask politely but firmly, would you please take off your mask? Science shows there's no reason for you to be wearing it. Your mask is making me uncomfortable. We should do that, Tucker says, and we should keep doing it. It's repulsive. And then what about when you see children, parents, where their kids are wearing masks? Your response to seeing, now this is where it gets evil. I don't know what word to use beyond that. I think this is where Carlson has stepped beyond the bounds of normal free speech and into basically inciting what could be some real tragedies. I mean, people are protective of their kids. Can you imagine a stranger walking up to you or your kid and telling you to do something that could cause you or your child to get sick and die, and doing it aggressively? There are some people who will respond, shall we say, a little emphatically. Carlson says, your response to seeing children wearing masks when they play should be no different from seeing someone beat a kid in Walmart. Call the police immediately. Contact Child Protective Services. Keep calling until someone arrives. What you're looking at is abuse. It's child abuse, and you're morally obligated to attempt to prevent it. Now, if you think that the millions of people watching and listening to Carlson, and of course his message has been amplified way beyond just his own show with this. This is now the song that the entire right is singing on talk radio, on television, on everything. If you think this isn't going to provoke some actual actions that may end up badly, I got a bridge to sell you in New York. I mean, this isn't some vague thing. He's calling for specific actions that can cause harm, that can cause death and disease. This is like so over the top. Telling people to call the police on somebody. What? My next door neighbor. My next door neighbor. Her child is wearing a mask. I'm dialing 911. Right? I mean, talk about the ultimate Karens, right? What would you do if you were walking down the street wearing a mask with your 10-year-old kid or your 15-year-old kid or your 5-year-old kid wearing a mask, and one of Tucker's viewers comes up to you and says, to quote Tucker here, and says, "Would you please take off your mask? Science shows there's no reason for you to be wearing it. Your mask is making me uncomfortable." How would you respond? How would you respond when that person puts the phone up to their ear, dials 911, and says, "I'd like to report an emergency. I'd like to report child abuse. Connect me to Child Protective Services. My neighbor, whose name is Joe Blow here, or Jane Doe," because I'm assuming this is one of your neighbors who is watching Tucker. "My neighbor and lives at 123 Main Street is committing child abuse. I want to talk to Child Protective Services right now. Tucker Carlson told me to do this, and I'm following through." How would you respond? What do you do when the police show up? What do you do when the police show up if you're not white? I mean, what is this guy trying to set up here? This is the guy who doesn't want white people to be replaced in America. And we know that, black people and people of color are more likely to die from this, so they're probably more likely to be wearing masks. Is that what's going on here? What say you?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
By the way, this is not just happening on Fox News. This is happening all over right-wing media, and now it's getting into the schools. I'll tell you about that after the break. And welcome back. Heidi Heidi, put you on the wrong, Heidi's on hybrid number 2, Sean, just FYI, my error. Heidi, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, Tom. You made a few mistakes about the science yesterday that I wanted to correct so you don't lose the argument. But first about Tucker Carlson, he waged a campaign that children shouldn't wear seatbelts. It was like 20 years ago because the government was mandating it, and he wouldn't let his own children wear seatbelts. But anyway, there were three kind of points. There were three kind of points that I wanted to make to you. It's the difference between passive herd immunity, herd immunity. There were some mistakes about about polio. And there were some mistakes about the 1918-1919 pandemic. But anyway, so there's there's active herd immunity where people, actively get a vaccination. So that doesn't.
Heidi, before I take medical advice from you, could you tell me what your credentials are?
Nursing student. I was going through my nursing books.
Okay.
So, yes, I was looking, to make sure, I was going through my anatomy and physiology and microbiology books yesterday, because I thought there was a mistake there. But anyway, so the passive herd immunity is when you get immunity from your mother, you have that for a while. And then there's some vaccination.
That's not called herd immunity. That's called the inherited is not the word, but there's a word for the kind of immunity that you get.
It's okay. Well, that's passive immunity. Okay, so
okay.
I think we're going to get into an argument about this, so I better skip that part of it. The thing is about
it's not herd immunity. That's my point.
Well, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to explain to you is what I was looking up yesterday, but I think I'm going to get an argument. But so let me just kind of let you, we'll pass that by. So about the 1918-1919 pandemic, there was a vaccine, but it wasn't effective because they really didn't know that much about viruses then. They kind of knew about them, but not really. So what happened is they made a vaccine for, they knew how to make bacterial vaccines. And, when you get a viral infection, usually there's a secondary bacterial infection. So anyway, so what they did is they had isolated a bacteria from, a secondary infection, and they made a bacterial vaccine, which did not work, of course, because it was a virus, which they didn't really understand at that point. So what happened with it, I guess I have to get back to passive herd immunity and active herd immunity again. So passive herd immunity is when you get a shot. Active is when enough people get it. So
Heidi, there was not a widespread campaign in the United States or anywhere else in the world in 1918 to vaccinate people against what was then referred to as the Spanish flu.
The vaccine was rushed to San Francisco, where there was
there may have been a local event, but there was no nationwide campaign to do that. The nationwide campaigns had to do with wearing masks.
That too, but they also tried to make a vaccine that did not work.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I got it. Heidi, we're out of time here. I'm sorry, but thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So the insanity continues. I mean, when this kind of non-scientific, outrage, politically motivated BS gets promoted on Fox News and other right-wing outlets, then disaster is sure to follow. And, for example, down in Miami, there's this, you've got this private school, and the woman who runs it, it's called the Centner Academy. It's named after a person, C-E-N-T-N-E-R, Ms. Centner. And she has frequently shared anti-vaccine posts on Facebook. And so she wrote a letter to all of her employees. Now, keep in mind, this is a school. It's a private school. Probably part of the whole charter school scam, getting our tax dollars, but, anyway. Just saying that, with a heavy heart, I have to inform you, my teachers, my employees, that if you have a vaccine, if you've been vaccinated, you have to stay away from the children. This is exactly what she wrote. She said, reports have surfaced recently. So this is the problem with looking things up on the internet and saying, oh yeah, I've got the scientific truth here. Reports have surfaced recently of non-vaccinated people being negatively impacted by interacting with people who have been vaccinated. So let me get this straight. Somebody's not vaccinated, they're vulnerable to the disease. Somebody else is vaccinated, They are immune to the disease, relatively speaking. The two have lunch together, and the person who's not vaccinated is negatively impacted. Now, I can see where the person who's vaccinated, who still has, with the regular wild COVID, a 5 or 10% chance of getting COVID, they won't die from it or end up in an ER, but, hey, you can still get COVID or even long COVID or some of the problems associated with COVID, heart disease and strokes and dementia and stuff like that. It's far less likely, radically less likely, but there's still a very small chance. Or as we're seeing now in Oregon, I heard the report this morning, Oregon Public Broadcasting, that we've now got over a dozen cases of the South African variant here. And in 2 cities, they're measuring the wastewater, and they're saying that the South African variant is starting to explode or starting to increase, which says to me that we're going to see here in Oregon probably over the next month or so the same kind of spike that the whole rest of the world seems to be seeing. Because the South African variant, the British variant is somewhat more contagious. The South African variant is 50% more contagious. Plus, it infects younger people, younger being in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And plus, it can throw them into the hospital, land them in the hospital. Young people who think, I'm immune, I read on Facebook, I don't need to take the vaccine. Right. So anyhow, she continues. This is the woman who runs this private school in her letter to her teachers with all the sound medical information she got off Facebook. She says, quote, even among our own population, we have at least 3 women with menstrual cycles impacted after having spent time with a vaccinated person. This, again, this is a false claim. This is a complete BS. There's no there whatsoever. That vaccinated people can somehow pass the vaccine to others and affect their reproductive systems? Really? So she gave her employees a couple of options. Tell us if you've been vaccinated, in which case we'll keep you away from the kids. Let us know if you get the vaccine, when you do, so that we cannot allow recently vaccinated people to be near our students until more information is known. Or wait till the school year is over to get vaccinated. Hey, you might just get sick and die anyway, right? And if you get the vaccine over the summer, you will not be allowed to return. I mean, this is bizarre. If your kid was in this school, how would you be responding? By the way, I yesterday, I'm making a phone call a day. Yesterday, I called my chiropractor's office. And the day before yesterday, it was a restaurant. Yesterday, it was my chiropractor's office. And I said, I need to have my back cracked. I am so looking forward to seeing you guys. It's been a year and a half. I'm assuming you're all vaccinated. I'm all vaccinated, so I'm ready. Let's make an appointment. And the woman kind of sheepishly said, well, no, none of us have had a vaccine here yet. Now, my chiropractor's in his 40s, maybe early 50s, and they just opened that up here in Oregon a week ago. So I'm not assuming that my chiropractor's an anti-vaxxer nut. So I said, well, here's my name and phone number. And she recognized me and she wrote it down and everything. And I said, call me when you're all vaccinated, or 2 weeks after you're all vaccinated, and I will be there. And she was like, okay, great, thank you. You gave us an added incentive to get our vaccines right away. And I'm like, good. So, step by step. But how would you respond if one of Tucker Carlson's mask holes walks up to you?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or calls the police on you, and the police come and say, we have a complaint that you're abusing your child with that mask. Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of déjà vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Carol in Marshall, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Oh, I just, as long as you've been talking about, COVID and children, we just had a small child in our community, a first grader, die from COVID complications and no underlying health conditions. So, the governor even spoke about it on the news last night. Very tragic. But, so people just need to understand this is, it's terrifying for parents to have their children in school and things. So that's all I had to say, Tom, but people just need to be more aware of that instead of spreading all that propaganda. It's just...
Well, and that, if you were knowledgeable about that and you're walking your kid down the street, I'm thinking of my grandson who's 3 years old and just, he's got wonderful parents. He assumes the world is filled with nice, friendly people, right? I doubt he's ever encountered bizarre, hostile, mentally ill Republicans. And if somebody was to come up and start shouting at him that he should take his mask off because it's making them uncomfortable or it's scientifically unnecessary, or yelling at his mother about that, that's trauma, Not to mention the fact that, as you point out, he can get, he's not immune. It's very rare that, a child that young would get sick from COVID and die, but it does happen. And it's just amazing, just amazing. Okay, Carol, thank you very much. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it, and for the report. I'm so sorry to hear that, the terrible situation, a family in mourning in Minnesota. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Well, I heard you talk about Tucker Carlson and what he had to say to his minions, and it stinks, sort of like the January 6th social. I figure it is a social destabilization effort, just another one. There's a divide and conquer that's been going on in this country with this two-party system, as well as other 2 or 3 income and racial group systems. It's coming to a head.
Okay, so you think Tucker Carlson trying to promote social dissension or social anger is part of, Tucker is part of this right-wing thing to start a war, a civil war? Is that what you're saying?
The way to destabilize any democracy, it's divide and conquer. Okay, and that's what's going on here.
Yeah, before the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda, there were the talk radio hosts who were demonizing the various groups. I
lost a bunch of good friends over the January 6th upheaval. So it's just progressing, and if we don't all stick together, we're all gonna fall further apart. We have to learn social responsibility again, not just personal responsibility. It's been drummed into us for the last umpteen years.
Right.
You have a
And
good
distinguish
day, people.
what's real. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's up?
You know, Tom, real quick, what your previous caller said, we all need to stick together. It's been so long that we've all been together. I think we may have forgotten, but any of us who were adults after the September 11th event remember that there were days and maybe even weeks where the country was absolutely united. And even though it was a tragedy, there was a feeling, there was a good feeling among the citizens and all the residents of this country. So we can have that back. And we should. I wish we would. It's breaking my heart. The reason I called is I discovered your show by accident maybe 5 years ago. And I really like it. I learned a lot. You've helped me quite a bit. I think I've got every single one of your hidden history books. I usually buy 2 and give one to somebody who I think would appreciate it. But right now, I'm pretty grumpy with you. And here's why. Every time I hear you say Fox News, I grind my teeth. I really, 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 I beseech you to consider not calling it Fox News. I can't even articulate those 2 words together. You could call it Fox Media, Fox Television, Fox whatever.
Well, I used to call it Fox so-called news. Is that
I remember
the beginning and end of your objection, Maverick? I mean,
I remember.
I'm happy to call it Fox so-called news.
Oh, yeah, but calling it Fox News, I think you're misrepresenting it. And I know you always.
Well, they're misrepresenting it. That's actually their brand name. That's their trademark. That, you know, if you want people to correctly understand what you're talking about. But I think by saying, you can say Fox Noise, you can say faux news, although that works better in print than on the radio. Okay, Fox so-called news. I did that for years and years.
Even though that's what they call it and that's what they present it, that doesn't mean you have to stay in the car with them and call it the same thing,
Yeah, I get it. Okay, Maverick, thanks a lot for the call. Scott in Los Angeles. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hiya, Tom. Just appreciate you very much and what you do. You mentioned chiropractic, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience with it in the last few months. In general, they're anti-vax. And I don't want to say all chiropractors. That's not appropriate. But I had a chiropractor I knew for 20 years and had been seeing for about a decade. And he sends a weekly email. And in December, he sent out an email saying that 85% of mask wearers, of COVID patients, were mask wearers. And I looked at the footnote, and it was Breitbart. So I already knew that was a problem.
Yeah.
And it took me about
it's also like saying, 92% of mass murderers have eaten mashed potatoes in the last 6 months.
Sure. And it took me about 20 seconds to debunk it. And I literally haven't been back to him since. And and I know his children, who are grown now, but in his office there's a poster of his daughter, and it says never vaccinated and always healthy, so on and so forth. And then so I sought a new chiropractor. And this guy was highly recommended and everything. When I came to him first time, we went into the room together, and he didn't pull his mask up. And I said, "Are you going to pull your mask up?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really need to in here." And it was like, well, that's really where you do need to. And then last week he was going off to go to Florida from Los Angeles. And I asked him, I said, "Well, have you been vaccinated?" And he said, "I don't do that." And so I haven't been back to him either. And I did a little research, and I found that it goes back to D.D. Palmer, who invented chiropractic. And he was an anti-vaxxer against the smallpox vaccine. And it's endemic in their training. And it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Yeah, way back in the day, when I was a teenager, when 19, 20 years old, Louise and I ran this thing called the Michigan Healing Arts Center, and we had a physician, Carol Varner was her name. We had a chiropractor, his name was Charlie Drosty. Carol, our doc, used to refer to him as Dr. Upchuck the Back Quack. It was very friendly, We had a massage therapist, myomassologist, straight, legitimate massage and everything. And we had this big old house out in Okemos that we had turned into the center. And I was studying herbs and homeopathy and stuff like that. But I knew Charlie really well. He was a chiropractor. In fact, he was the chiropractor for the MSU rugby team. And he was a fan of vaccinations. I mean, it wasn't an ideology with him. Maybe he was the outlier. I don't know. But I'm sad to hear that. I know who Palmer was, and the Palmer method, in fact, is what Charlie used, and showed me a lot of the moves, and Louise and I used to practice on each other. But I'm sorry to hear that, Scott. I'm going to have to. Maybe I should call him back today and say, "Are you ever going to get vaccinated? Because if you're not, I need to do some shopping." So, Scott,
if I get, my wife
last point, sure.
My wife got her second Moderna yesterday, and I get mine on Sunday, and I'm looking forward to it, actually.
Good on you. Yeah, it's like the world kind of brightens up a little bit, and suddenly there's opportunity, and now some of the things that we've wanted to do we'll be able to do. Thanks a lot for the call, Scott. Tim in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, we just have a minute to the break. You wanted to talk about a chiropractor too?
No, well, kind of. Tom, you're promoting calling your favorite restaurants, chiropractor, etc., and saying, "Hey, gee whiz, I'll come along when you start demanding vaccination records at the door and such." And I was thinking this, in order to get more people to sign on to doing something like this, it might be wise to encourage people to call those establishments that are, in fact, not their favorites, not the ones they despise, but the ones they rarely go to. Because if your primary establishment fails to follow through, then on a matter of principle, you can no longer go there. You see what I mean?
Right. So now you have a plan B. Is that your point, Tim?
Yeah. It's a psychological thing to spur people instead of going up against their favorite establishment, go up against the ones that are not their favorite establishment.
Well, call all of them for that matter. I'm just trying to encourage people. Hang on just a second, Tim.
ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Sorry, we always get stepped on. Last thought?
Yeah. I guess the last thought is that, lo and behold,
I guess that was it. Tim, I'm sorry, we're out of time. And welcome back. Let's see here. Free Speech TV and Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that this past weekend on Ira Glass's This American Life, NPR, they had the whole story about what happened here in Santa Cruz County regarding COVID, and the two county health officials here who are still here. They didn't quit. They almost quit. They were getting death threats. This is in liberal Santa Cruz County, but they also brought up, the people that were involved in the anti-mask were, these very, old hippies, if you want, extremist leftists, and of course the Trumpanzees. But the other half of the show was about a Frank Luntz focus group with 7 Trump supporters, Trump voters, who were refusing to get vaccinations. And it was a Zoom meeting that he had with these people in order to get them vaccinated. They had a couple of Republican politicians on talking to them and a couple of doctors. But the guy who got them actually to say that they were going to get vaccinated, Chris Christie. He told his story of getting sick and almost dying. And that did the trick, apparently.
Yeah. Nothing like being afraid of dying. There you go. And so, I read an article about that.
Around, 50, 60-year-old people. And when especially one of the women was interviewed, and she said, well, when he talked about Hope Hicks, she got really sick, and she's only like 30, and she runs like 4 or 5 miles a day. And that's what really got her. It wasn't just Christy's story about being hospitalized, but a young woman getting sick. And she said, hey, if she could get sick like that, then maybe I should get vaccinated.
Yeah, and it turns out Trump was actually a whole lot sicker than we realized. His oxygen levels were in the 80s, which means he was really on the edge there when they took him to Walter Reed. So, but that story will never be known, at least from his lips. And he's apparently has no interest in pointing out to people that he did make that one-off statement where he said, yeah, sure, go get vaccinated. But he and Melania both got vaccinated in secret while he was president and she was first lady. They just didn't want people to know because, hey, they're trying, in my opinion, and this is the most cynical possible, but I have not heard anything that rebuts it or seen anything that even suggests that I'm wrong, is that they're trying to sabotage the Biden administration, just like they tried to sabotage the Obama administration for 8 years by claiming that Obama wasn't a legitimate president and wasn't a U.S. citizen. And, not to mention...
the filibustering did him in. It'll be interesting tomorrow night when Biden is going to be up there in front of the senators and the Congress people. I'm just wondering if there's going to be a stunt pulled by Empty Green and Boebert and these other Republicans, maybe turning their back to him or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be wild to watch. It is going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to that speech tomorrow night. Dennis, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back in 1 minute with more of our program. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Christine in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Christine, thanks for listening to 92.7 FM. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I just had a story about my dentist. I asked them if they were vaccinated because I wanted to know, and they said they would not tell me because of HIPAA law.
That's a lie. The HIPAA law says that they can't tell you about your next door neighbor, but anybody can reveal their own personal medical information to anybody under any circumstances without the HIPAA law, as long as they're not being coerced. That was just their way of saying we're not going to tell you.
And I even asked if I could just speak just to the dentist personally and ask him if he would tell me. And she said no. She checked with somebody and she came back and said no, because of HIPAA, they were not giving out that information.
Right. So you've got a bunch of dentists. You've got a dentist whose office listens to right-wing talk radio or watches Fox News. That's real sad. That's the next call I've got to make. I actually had a filling fallout a few months ago, and I got this temporary filling stuff on Amazon that is in that tooth right now, and I've got an appointment for early May, but I've got to call and just I want to confirm that you're all fully vaccinated and that's all you're seeing in your office before I'll walk in there. So
well, I have been to the dentist, and it is kind of scary, but I put a small mask just over my nose when I go in, and then that seemed to work. But
yeah,
go ahead.
So you're breathing through your nose.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, I wondered about the HIPAA law, if that prevents them from. But
no, that was BS. I mean, I'm not a physician and I can't represent myself as an authority on the HIPAA law, but I would be astonished if I'm wrong in saying that. An individual can tell you anything. He may not be able to, under HIPAA, tell you that his dental hygienist is vaccinated without that person's permission. But you would think that everybody in the office would give permission to say, yes, I've had a vaccine. It's not like saying, hey, I've had a venereal disease. I mean, it's like, it's a completely different thing,
It's something good.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your help. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good talking with you, Christine. Thank you. Judith in San Antonio. Hey, Judith, what's up?
Hi. Yes, I have a brother who's a doctor of chiropractic down in Miami, and he's had the COVID. He's been vaccinated. He doesn't let anyone in his office without a mask. He wears a mask. I mean, and he went to school in California. It's been decades since he went to school.
Yeah, so it's not the profession. It's just the individual, some folks are crackpots and some aren't. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that, Judith. I really appreciate it. Thank you very kindly. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question and also a comment, and I would like to see what your thoughts are. I think that the way the vaccines are being produced is not a very, very good way for the public. There should be an independent panel of scientists evaluating all the vaccines and then pick. Well, but they are not. They should be picking the best vaccine and use that model to produce all the vaccines. But instead, we have drug companies, bidding for these vaccines.
That's called competition. How's that a bad thing, Alfredo?
Well, you have vaccines.
What if the one that we picked was the least effective one? I mean, earlier, just like 20, 30 minutes ago, I don't think it was Fauci, but it was somebody from the federal government was presenting the information on the I think it's called Sinopharm, PHARM, the Chinese vaccine. And it's less effective. The Russian vaccine seems to be less effective. It depends on the different variants. There's different levels of effectiveness. I think, frankly, it's a good idea that we have that variety of things right now. It's what's going to shake out eventually is what's best. But we also have 7 billion people on this planet. We've only produced about 1 billion shots so far, and I believe less than 3% of them have gone to low-income countries, and that's a crime in and of itself. All these things that we need to address. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, regarding the AstraZeneca vaccine, has anyone tried, for example, taking anti-inflammatories like aspirin for those who are, so that people can, if people are having these blood clot issues, wouldn't that prevent these issues?
No, it wouldn't. In fact, they specifically, this is one of the reasons why there was this long pause with the J&J vaccine, and this is what they've learned in Europe with the AstraZeneca also, is that these types of blood clots that are formed are not forming in people who would typically be at risk for blood clots, people who are dehydrated or people who have very, very large number of platelets or people who have clotting disorders. In fact, it's the opposite. It seems to be appearing in people who have somewhat lower levels of platelets, of red blood cells than normal. So no, follow your doctor's advice. I have no advice to give you on that other than to say that I know, and it's widely known that it's a whole completely different thing. Let's see here. Catherine in Clearwater, South Carolina. Catherine, we have a little less than a minute. I'm sorry for a short one here. You got a quick one?
Okay, I'm ready. Tom, I've been watching your show, and it seems like everything seems to point back to conspiracies. There's conspiracies about elections, conspiracies about vaccines and everything. And my family is falling into these traps, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it, Tom. I wish I could. I started researching. I can't seem to find any good books about it. Maybe you could
What's the it you're talking about?
Recommend a book on one of your things.
Which I'm not sure what topic you're talking about.
Just conspiracies in general and how people are falling into them, with the anti-vaxxing, with everything lately, politics, and the election was stolen, and,
Yeah, wow. Great question, Catherine. Let me ponder that. I don't have a, off the top of my head, answer other than reading some of, dailycoast.com kind of websites.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Easy Flow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They're about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, we have full-blown hysteria on the right. Oh, my God, oh, my God. The Daily Mail, this rag in London in the UK, published this article saying that Joe Biden wants to cut your meat supply down to one burger a year or thereabouts in order to stop climate change. And now America's right wing is just hysterical about it. On the line with us, let's find out if he's hysterical. I don't know. Julio Rivera, editorial director at Reactionary Times, contributor to Newsmax, The American Thinker, and townhall.com, reactionarytimes.com. Oh, yeah, it's Julio is Julio's Twitter handle. Hey, Julio, so are you all flipped out about this, too?
I think it's much ado about nothing in a lot of ways. I do want to make a point, though, about CO2. I think sometimes people forget, and this is probably one of the only things that, when it comes to the climate conversation that really, truly is settled science, is that, CO2 really is the fruit of all life. I mean, we need carbon. We're carbon-based. Human beings are carbon-based. And I think that, over the last couple of years, actually last couple of decades, I think a lot of this has been influenced by, money. We have, certain scientific studies that are funded, whether they're funded by special interests, that are either
like fossil fuel billionaires,
energy lobby, or now we have the meatless meat lobby that's starting to grow. It's actually really grown a lot under Trump. I mean, there's I think about 800 companies that are focused on making meatless meat, and 70 new startups just in the last couple of years. So it's actually flourishing. And that could be a good thing in a sense. There's certain ethical issues regarding, how we procure meat and whatnot. I personally don't have an issue with eating meat, but yeah, I think that you're going to get alarmism swinging in every direction when it comes to an issue like this, Tom.
Okay, so let's deal with this carbon dioxide issue to begin with, because this was the sales pitch of the this think tank that's up here in the Pacific Northwest, the Pacific Institute or something like this. And they published this book about 15, 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, because I debated the author of it on this program, in which they were pointing out that, you and I breathe, and all other animals breathe in oxygen and breathe out waste material, carbon dioxide. And plants inhale carbon dioxide and exhale as their waste material oxygen. And therefore, we've got this kind of symbiotic relationship. And his theory was that because plants inhale carbon dioxide, therefore, more carbon dioxide must be better for the plants. And so they actually did some science on this, where they took greenhouses and they took the CO2 level in the greenhouse and they raised it from 300 parts per million, which is where, more or less, I think we were at 320 parts per million in 1860, from 300 parts per million to 400 parts per million, which we passed, 5-10 years ago, to 450 parts per million to 500 parts per million. And what they found was that, the plants grew faster at first, but their stems weren't strong enough, their leaves weren't resilient enough, they weren't capable of producing seeds. There were all kinds of problems because, hundreds of millions, literally hundreds of millions, in some cases billions of years of evolution had matched those plants, or certainly in the last few million years, had matched those plants to the contemporary CO2 levels. So as CO2 levels go up, what we find is that our forests actually become weaker. They become less resilient. A lot of plants are producing more cellulose, but they're producing a hell of a lot less nutrients. So, no, more carbon is not a good thing. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. And I'm not saying that we need to have a carbon overdose, but I mean, there's scientists out here that I've read that said that our CO2 levels at this point are too low, and they need to come up. That they've been much higher.
Well, those people are lying through their teeth to you, Julio.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Let me.
And I guarantee you that they're making money that they're taking money from fossil fuel billionaires.
Evidence. Why is an area in the Sahara Desert the size of France and Germany regreening now? Is that not a good thing that a desert is regreening? Listen, climate change happens naturally. It's been happening for billions of years. It's not, humans, and it's not fossil.
Julio, that's like saying, hey, my friend who's dying of cancer right now injured his knee, and it looks like the bruise is all healed up. He's still dying of cancer. I mean, come on. So, yes, climate change is happening all over the planet.
Tom, listen, I know
there are some places where it is going to produce a locally good effect. There are most places where it's going to produce a locally bad effect, and we're seeing this all over the country.
Where, Tom? Where?
Well, for example, the Northern Triangle countries of Central America that are...
And the glaciers in Manhattan is going to be underwater, and the Earth is going to survive for 12 years, always with the doomsday conspiracies, and the theories. And none of this has actually happened. If we had believed every doomsday theory that's come out ever since people realized the money that is in the environmental lobby,
that's another straw man argument,
40 years ago.
But you know what caused the Syrian crisis. You know what caused the Arab Spring. The reason that wheat prices went up.
Climate change?
Yeah, it was. The reason wheat prices went up in Tunisia, which is where the original guy set himself on fire, was because the desert had moved 80 miles south in a period of 15 years. Literally thousands of small subsistence farmers got wiped out. Yes, it was. It was because carbon dioxide levels are going up and the desert is moving south. The same thing happened in Syria. In Syria, the desert moved south 120 miles. You can look this up. The desert moved south 120 miles. Tens of thousands of subsistence farmers ended up in Aleppo and the other major Syrian cities. And then Bashir al-Assad said, "I'm not going to feed them." And there was no food, and that was your original revolt.
Let me tell you something. In America, since Joe Biden became president, he's attacking the fossil fuel industry. That has a direct effect. You have millions of listeners. The fact that they're paying more for food, they're paying more for the pump, that there's less opportunities of employment in the energy sector in America is due to this bad pseudoscience.
There are more jobs in the energy sector in America than there have ever been.
Go ahead and push their interest in Washington, D.C.
There are more jobs in the energy sector than ever before. It's just that they're in clean energy, Julio. We're shutting down these dirty coal plants. We're shutting down these dirty oil plants. The cost of generating electricity with wind power and solar power is now below, in the United States, below the cost of generating that same power with oil, with gas, with coal, or even with nuclear power, especially
and oil.
Nuclear power.
And we reached energy independence for the first time in like 50 years under President Trump, and prices at the pump and prices at the grocery store were just fine. This is an example of why Democrats should just leave well enough alone. It's just like what's going on at the border.
Iowa is getting 70% of their electricity from the wind and solar.
The Homeland Security will not acknowledge. You got Alejandro Mayorkas, Mr. Broke the Glass Ceiling, the first Hispanic leader of DHS, saying we don't have a border crisis, while simultaneously acknowledging that more people.
So if all of this is true, Julio, and we just have 30 seconds left, why is it necessary for people on your side to try to freak people out that they're not going to be able to eat meat? Why do they have to lie to people?
Freak people out? You guys are the king of freaking people out. No, Manhattan underwater. The Earth is going to be destroyed in 12 years, and we're all going to be dead. You guys are the kings of alarmism.
We have drought here in the West. You've got drought in the Northern Triangle countries in Central America. It's one of the things that's driving refugees up to here. Well, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be.
Happy Earth Day, Tom. Happy Earth Day. I hope you had a great Earth Day.
Thank you. Back at you, Julio. Julio Rivera, the editorial director of ReactionaryTimes.com. Oh, yeah, it's Julio is his Twitter handle. Julio, good talking with you. Thank you. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So are you worried about Biden's meatless Mondays? Actually, there's no... Biden is like a big fan of hamburgers, apparently. We'll be back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jim in Long Beach, California. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today? Jim? On Hybrid One? Sean? No Jim. Okay. I'm putting Jim on hold just in case. I think he's been sitting there on hold for a while. Alan in Tucson, Arizona on line 4. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Excuse me. Seriously, this is going to sound like a snowflake point, and I literally couldn't love you more if you were my older brother. But the description of the description of mentally ill Republicans, I think that's really unfair to them, the mentally ill, because there's enough stigma against this, and like I said, it sounds kind of like a snowflake point. But I'm mentally ill and have been my entire life. And hatred, zealotry, and fanaticism, sedition, ignorance, ascribing to conspiracy theories, which have no basis in fact, that's not a mental illness.
Well, it is if it's based in paranoia.
Okay, you have a point. And
I think a lot of it is.
And it's a feedback loop.
Yeah. I'm not calling Republicans who subscribe to these theories mentally ill as a way of slurring them. I'm dead serious. When I look at billionaires who are willing to destroy the planet just to make an extra $1 billion when there's no way they could spend the billions that they already have, the only conclusion I can come to is that this is a person who has such a severe case of obsessive compulsive disorder, a mental illness, and their obsession is money. Well, it's that too, because they're willing to kill people. But you're combining their sociopathic tendencies with their OCD. Well, you could say it's a personality disorder, but
that's sociopathy, though, Tom. That's sociopathy. That's a personality disorder. Personality disorders are not necessarily mental illness.
OCD is not a personality disorder. But I don't want to split hairs with you here.
Yeah,
Alan.
we're splitting hairs here. I mean, we largely agree.
I think what you're saying is,
it's just like
that
the mentally ill. We're stigmatized all the time. We stigmatize ourselves. I
agree.
And it's just, and it's very hard to bear. And like I said, zealotry and hatred, racism. If you're a cop and you're willing to kill black people, or eager to kill black people, like Derek Chauvin did. That's not mental illness. That's evil.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you on that, Alan. And I hope that if I call somebody crazy or whatever, it doesn't come across as a slur on mentally ill people. I try to be conscious of that.
Okay. Like I said, it's kind of a snowflake point. But talking about snowflakes.
Hey, you're entitled to it.
What about Tucker Carlson? What about Tucker Carlson? What about all these people who are offended about us wearing masks?
Yeah, well, Tucker, keep in mind, Tucker makes $10 million a year. Every 5 weeks, he gets $1 million deposited to his checking account. Every night he goes on TV for an hour and he's paid $200,000. He's doing pretty well. And he's got a shtick.
Breaking news is coming up. Real quick on Anything Goes Friday, I'd really like to talk to you about conspiracy theories, because I was into that in the 90s before the internet was really
Sure. Call us on some Friday, Alan. I got to run right now, but give us a call on Friday. I'd love to have that conversation. Thank you. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. With you. And, there's a couple of issues here that I wanted to get into today. I think that this whole issue of policing, we are now, in fact, I should just check and see if anything has happened here in the last, 10 minutes or 15 minutes on this killing or this shooting of Mr. Brown in North Carolina, Andrew Brown Jr., And yes, it turns out that what's happened is that the FBI has said that they're going to open a civil rights investigation. When is it time? Is it not now time to stop the slave patrol policing? we're the only country that has this as our legacy. Yes, slavery was legal in other countries. It existed in other countries. A lot of other countries, particularly European countries, have made a lot of money on the slave trade. But the epicenter of it all was the United States, and particularly the American South. And to have slavery, you must have a police state. You must have absolute brutality. And that's what we had here, and that's what we still have here with our policing. I mean, Andrew Brown Jr., his family is saying that the deputies were executing a search warrant. They said, you know, he's a felon. It turned out he actually has a misdemeanor conviction for drug possession, like, you know, big whoop. His lawyer, Mr. Crump, said, let's be clear, this was an execution. This was a day after Derek Chauvin was convicted, and a day after 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant was fatally shot by a police officer in Columbus, Ohio. And Chantel Sherry Lassiter, one of the attorneys, she says 7 to 8 deputies swarmed his car with their guns drawn, shooting at him while yelling, "Let me see your hands." He trying to evade the bullets. He kept his hands on the wheel, by the way. Brown backed his car into a tree. This attorney says, who saw the tape, says there was no time in the 20 seconds that we saw when he was threatening the officers in any kind of way. His son, Khalil Farabi, says, my dad just got executed just trying to save his own life. He got executed. And now Mayor Betty Parker has declared a state of emergency for Elizabeth City, the county seat, on Monday morning, yesterday morning. 7 deputies at the scene who have not been named have been placed on administrative leave. The Chief Deputy Daniel Fogg, he says, Brown was a convicted felon. Turns out, like I said, he'd been previously convicted of misdemeanor drug possession. Those who watched the encounter told local media, this from the Washington Post, by the way, a piece by Jim Morrison and company, that he got into his car and started to drive away, and that's when neighbors say the deputies started shooting. One neighbor collected 14 shell casings. So when are we going to figure this out, that this doesn't work? You know, that the slave patrol policing technique and the hyper-militarization of our military, which started in the late 1980s under Reagan with his 1099 or whatever the number is for the program, where the Defense Department gave, quote, surplus equipment to police departments, and then defense contractors started producing huge amounts of that surplus equipment. So here in the United States, in order to be a cop, on average, it varies from place to place and locale to locale, but on average across the United States, you need a high school diploma and 21 weeks of training. Last year, police in the United States killed an average of 3 people a day, 1,004 people. In Finland, it requires a 3-year college degree to become a police officer. And, well, last year we killed over 1,000, our police killed over 1,000 people. In Finland, during an 18-year period, 2000 to 2018, the last dates for which there are statistics, 7 people were killed by the police in 18 years. In Norway, they require 3 years of college to become a police officer. Between 2002 and 2016, they had 4 fatalities caused by the police. In Germany, 2 years of training to become a police officer. 267 people have died by police shooting in 31 years since 1990. 267 people. We're killing 1,000 people a year, or at least our police are. What is wrong with this country? And then on top of that, we've got 5 different Fox News personalities saying, oh my God, you're only going to be able to eat 1 hamburger a year if Joe Biden's infrastructure package passes. So we go from, you know, violent, wild, awful, real-life, crazed stuff, you know, killing of people by police officers, particularly people of color, to absolute screaming BS. It's all over our media.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of the break. Stick around. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. In this camera, right? 3. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is chapter 1. I sit in the living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee met for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school. Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you? A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the others set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical. Superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. But becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. A lot on the table. And it's like, you know, the crazies are out in massive numbers. It's that school that I told you about earlier, where the head of the school sent out the letter to all the teachers saying, we've had problems with vaccinated teachers being around unvaccinated teachers and screwing up their menstrual cycles. And we think that it's dangerous for vaccinated teachers to be near students, so you can't come. Turns out she's a mega donor to the Republican Party. At least according to the headline over at Raw Story right now. You know, in fact, they've kind of flipped the frame on the story from craziness in a school to GOP mega donor promotes craziness in a school. Oh, God. Alan in Seattle. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, well, that story about the school is why we can't have nice things, I think. I've been out of work as a professional stagehand for over a year now because, of course, theaters and rock and roll and conventions and trade shows gather large groups of people together in small spaces. So as long as people coming in from out of state, like Florida, aren't vaccinated, how the heck am I supposed to be able to go back to work? Because we'll never get there.
Yeah. Well, and this is why we need vaccine passports, and it's why we need social pressure, and it's why every day that goes by that Donald Trump doesn't create a PSA saying, I was vaccinated even though I had COVID, and so is my wife. It was a good thing. You should be too. It's why, you know, half of all the Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives refuse to tell a news organization whether they have or have not been vaccinated. It's why those folks are arguably, and this is going to sound really, you know, kind of radical, but they're arguably committing a form of murder, a form of homicide. You know, not like first degree, but whatever that is, murder by neglect or murder by, you know. Yeah, the equivalent of yelling fire in a crowded theater and somebody gets trampled and dies. You know, it's kind of the other way around. And
Ooh, I would love to see a crowded theater.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perfect metaphor for you, Alan. Well, I hope you get back to work soon. And you know, I did notice there's you know, one of the football teams. I'm sorry, I'm not a sports fan, so I don't recall which one it was, but one of the football teams had a game last weekend, and they had a whole section in the stadium that was devoted exclusively to people who would show an ID, you know, a vaccine card. And in that part of the stadium, people could sit together with each other. They could be with their families, et cetera. Whereas everywhere else, everybody had to social distance and wear masks and things. So I think it's coming. I think it's coming slowly. And like I said yesterday, I think one of the things that we can do to encourage this is call the places of business that we have patronized, would like to patronize, or even that, you just like to poke them and just say, hey, I'd like to come down to your garden store and pick out some tomatoes for my garden this afternoon. I just want to make sure that you're only letting people who are vaccinated in there, because I don't want to be walking around with some guy who's got the South African variant, which is starting to show up here now in Oregon. And you can get this variant even if you're vaccinated. You won't die from it, but you can still get it, and it can still cause damage. I would just like to know that everybody in your store has been vaccinated. Are you ready to have me as a customer? And I think, if they start getting enough calls like that, then we'll see the time when, for example, to get into a theater, you've got to show your proof of vaccination, and people like you working in the theater will feel safe, and people like me coming to the theater will feel safe, and that'll be a good thing. Alan, I got to move on, but thank you for the call. Well said. Thank you very much. I wish you the very best. Pat in LaPorte, Indiana. Hey, Pat, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I have a couple of ideas for incentives to get people to be vaccinated. One is, besides your idea of social pressure, which I think is great, but, insurance companies love to have a new product, and the Republicans love to support big business like insurance companies. Why can't there be a premium charge for people who have decided that they're not going to get vaccinated for COVID? In other words, if you're not going to get vaccinated, you're going to cost my company more money, so we're going to charge you a premium for the fact that you are not vaccinated.
Yeah,
it's like your idea.
I'm guessing probably, Pat, within 6 months you're going to start seeing that happen.
Yeah, I think that should happen sooner, because there's a lot of people out there who are saying, oh, I'm not going to get vaccinated because of, just ridiculous reasons, like it's going to change my race or it's going to affect my DNA. That's nuts. But if it's going to
there's
affect
baby
their
parts in there.
If it's going to affect their pocketbook, they may think about it differently. And the other thing I wanted to mention to you was,
before you get your other thing, if I could just close that out.
Sure.
The reason why I said I think it's going to take a few months is because it was just last week that here in Oregon, everybody over 16 could get vaccinated. And there's like 2 million people in line right now. So, and I know that, similar things are happening all around the country. The goal was to have everybody over 16 eligible for vaccine pretty much by now, and we're pretty much there. We definitely will be there, by the 1st of May. But it's going to then take a few months for everybody to get vaccinated. So probably July, August, the insurance companies are going to start looking at this going, when we get somebody with COVID, that costs us, $300,000 for their hospitalization and their treatment, plus the long-term consequences could be another $1 million. Whereas we get somebody who's vaccinated, then they don't get COVID, it doesn't cost us that. So we're either going to offer discounts for people who are vaccinated, or we're going to offer a surcharge for people who aren't. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. But they're going to have to wait until it's widely available, which is not yet now.
And I want you to keep pushing the idea of insurance for gun owners, just like public liability insurance for driving a car. You own a gun, whether you're a police officer or whether you're a private citizen, you should have insurance. You hurt somebody, you damage someone's property by shooting through their window, whatever. You should be able to say, hey, your insurance needs to cover this.
Yeah. And by the way, we have liability insurance not just with our cars, we have it also with our homeowners insurance. And if somebody slips on your sidewalk or in your living room and falls and injures themselves, you have homeowners insurance that protects you, liability insurance. So yeah, it should be.
Keep doing the good work you're doing, Tom. Listen to you every day and appreciate your ideas.
Thanks, Pat. I'll do my very best. Great to hear from you. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Well, if I could just jump on the last caller here, continue. I'd go a little further and say, once we have a surplus supply of vaccine doses and no takers, that's the date at which we say, if you get COVID and you are not vaccinated, you will not be allowed to come to the hospital. You will have to be treated either at home, or what they ought to do is set up tents at the county fairgrounds and say, you'll go to the COVID concentration camp, but you're not coming to the hospital to get in the way of everybody else who comes for needs stitches because they got a cut or something or any other. You're not going to stand in the way of progress. Just because you refuse.
Create COVID sanatoriums. Back in the 80s when we were fighting the smoking wars, the smoking, no smoking wars, and I used to carry around a little battery-operated fan and embarrass Louise whenever we'd sit in a restaurant. Back then, there was talk about, there were people who were arguing that people who get lung cancer who are smokers should not get treatment in hospitals, or that insurance, and it was pretty widely rejected as, we can be tough, but that's brutal. But
you know what?
You offered a kind of a plan B that was not offered back then, which is, okay, we'll take some facilities, maybe some old hospitals or old sanatoriums or an old hotel someplace, and we'll turn those into exclusively for COVID. And so you kind of get dumped into the COVID, what do you want to call it, sanatorium or something. Well, that's an idea, Paul.
I made this argument to my mother, my very aged mother, who was a retired nurse practitioner, and she got very upset with me. Oh, you can't do that. And I said, Mom, things are different now. We're not denying care. I'm saying you will be cared for at home. And that is a new trend in medicine. They don't want you in the hospital. I said, if you had the flu, they wouldn't want you to come to the emergency room. And I said, they've been treating you for your heart failure at home. Come on, Mom. And she said, well, now she came around and said, yeah, you got a point there. If people are going to refuse, no, it's true. They don't want people in the hospital. And so, you can't have that. Anyway, my start to my comment is Tom, is that your conversation with Julio is, you know what, when the right wing are not in power, they just, in fact, even when they are, they just go back to beating the same old dead horse memes. And this, climate is always changing. You can just list them. There's 6 or 8 or 10 of them. Gays, whatever. It's the same. And now they've gotten so they can really troll us, just like a big brother teasing you. They can say anything, and we go out of our minds. And what this does, Tom, is it gets us down in the mud so we can't move on. And so it's the old saying, it is the idiot who argues with the fool. The fool is acting silly, but it's only the idiot who argues with someone who's acting silly. So that's what we're doing.
Okay. It is, and it's what I'll continue to do, Paul, in defense of my own programming here. The fact of the matter is that I thought Julio was going to come on and freak out about the whole meat thing. That's what we scheduled him for. That was the topic. And immediately he says, no, okay, you're right. I'm not going to fight that. And, what do you do? Paul, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I keep looking for a right-winger who's freaked out about the meat. I don't know, maybe they only exist on Fox News. Okay, and welcome back. Jim in Long Beach, California. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, you got my mind swirling here. I agree with almost all of your recommendations. But I'm going to support, especially at this moment, the call to your electeds for a special prosecutor about the January 6th movement, because that House did all winds together. That's based on false information, money behind it, and all that, which measure up probably pretty closely to anti-vaxxers. But what we have to understand is why they believe that, and there's a real lack of education and a real undermining of education by moneyed interests. And I would like to say, in terms of the resistance to the vaccines and the lack of information, is that it's actually never been the vaccines. None of them have been declared safe and effective. They're all still experimental. And when people hear shaming, they hear being told what to do rather than being informed. And if I might add one more thing, Fauci himself one time stated what the path to building up your immune system personally at home was through, vitamin D3, et cetera. And those, people have different approaches to it. So,
but that is not prophylactic, Jim. For there is evidence that people who have normal or above normal levels of both zinc and vitamin D in their bloodstreams have slightly better outcomes when they get COVID. They're less likely to die, or they're less likely to suffer serious disease. Or maybe it's actually the other way around. Those people who are deficient in those nutrients are the ones who are most likely to crash and burn. Exactly, but that is not prophylactic against that. Well, it's not like a vaccine. And yes, the vaccines have have temporary permission. But that does not mean that this is a giant science experiment that's being done on people. The experiments have been done over the last 6 years. These mRNA vaccines have been around for quite a while. This is the first time that they've been applied specifically to this particular protein and this particular virus. But people were working with them on MERS back 5 years ago. The Middle Eastern, version of COVID. They actually didn't work for MERS, as far as they could tell. But MERS is a real tough one because it's got something like a 50% fatality rate. So, how do you test this on people?
It's an education process, not just telling people what to do. That's why they're resistant. They resist being told what to do. And then the anti-education element is there. It has to be education, not just you got to do it. And I agree that, I'm not going to go into my acupuncturist without a mask. He won't let me. He's from China. He said, remember, they built a hospital in a week or 10 days. That was isolation of the people, and they don't have a problem. And we're talking about totally different things here, but they solved the problem. And we somehow forget and don't educate people about the system that could, be a bit different. That's all.
Oh, if Trump had simply put a mask mandate into place back in February or March, which, by the way, he was planning on doing. They pulled it on the week of April 7th when they discovered that mostly it was black people who were dying in mostly blue states. But if they had just put a mask mandate into place like most other countries did, we would have saved 400,000 lives. And you've got people like Deborah Birx now coming out using that number and saying so. 400,000 Americans died who didn't have to die simply because Donald Trump thought masks were not manly. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma. A serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Phyllis in Chicago. Hey, Phyllis, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just have a comment. I just don't understand why Republicans who disagree with Democrats always have to argue, bully, like Jim Jordan on your show, and you keep your cool. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I enjoy listening to you.
Well, thank you, Phyllis. My sense of it is that people who try to shout over other people or kind of beat people down verbally don't have a good argument to begin with, and so that's what they have to resort to. And I think it comes through, right? I mean, I think it's
Yes, it does.
it's fairly obvious. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. It's nice to hear from you, fellas. Larry in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Morning, Tom. I wanted to respond about your question about how to fix the police, which everybody asks. Yeah, listen, back at about 1980, my wife and I were involved in a very dangerous police shooting situation, and I had some extensive interviews with the police there. That was in Oakland. And our lives were actually endangered. We had to literally flee for our lives. Anyway, what I want to talk about here is, while I was there, I got to look at some of the police recruitment stuff, and I noticed that a rookie cop at that time, and this is unbelievable, made almost exactly as much as my wife, who had 35 years experience as a school teacher and a master's degree, and the requirement for the rookie cop, beginning police officer, was a GED or better. Now, this leads to what my point is. We need to truly professionalize the police. The big stumbling block is police unions. They don't want any part of that. Police chiefs don't want any part of that. But let's assume in a more perfect world to actually credential police out as you would a teacher, require at least a 4-year degree from a legitimate school, even if it was 2 years in criminology and 2 years in the regular curriculum. Require at least that to apply for the job, and a master's degree for promotion. This is very consistent with almost every profession
like the military.
now.
If you want to be an officer, you got to have a degree.
Exactly. And again, a good idea about they pay for their insurance, a good idea that they're peer-reviewed, legitimate peer review as professionals.
You know,
do.
Larry, we had a time in the United States where if you went to a doctor, you had no idea if that doctor was going to be a good doctor or a quack doctor, basically.
True.
I'm talking about like pre-1920s, the mid-1920s. Prior to that, you could literally become a doctor or a lawyer through a correspondence course. People were practicing surgery who were not surgeons. I mean, it was a mess. And there were some very good doctors out there. There were some real quacks. There was a real mess. And we got our act together. The American Medical Association, Congress, legislatures, state by state. Actually, it started, and then I went national. And then we developed national standards for medicine, for physicians, for nurses, standards for licensure, standards for licensure within specialties, which you could even have within police departments. You have to have a certain type of certification to be a homicide cop, a detective, versus a burglary cop or something like that. But that standardization happened in this country about 100 years ago. And it revolutionized the field of medicine, and it increased our trust in the field of medicine.
Exactly.
And we need to do the same thing with policing.
Absolutely. And anecdotally, by the way, I was at Berkeley in the 60s, and they had a first-rate criminology department there. And it was part of my curriculum for studying politics. And lo and behold, the department, this was during the Vietnam War demonstrations, and so there was a lot of police contact, negative contact, of course, on the campus, including a helicopter spraying tear gas on us. But anyway, the course became so focused on doing exactly what I'm saying here. Ronald Reagan convinced the regents to discontinue the entire department, and they got rid of the criminology department. That was about 68 or 9, I think. Yeah, I was there.
Wow. Isn't
that something?
Wow. That is something, that they got rid of the criminology department. This is, and then I suppose there's probably good criminology departments and bad criminology departments. Like in the 1920s, there were good medical schools and bad medical schools. Berkeley
was good at damn near everything, I can tell you.
Yeah. No,
quite a place.
I
Really.
believe it.
Quite a place.
Yeah, and it still has an excellent reputation as one of the best schools in America, one of the best schools in the world. But we need standards. We need national standards for policing. And part of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act establishes at least some beginning baseline standards for education and for accountability. And again, the only thing that's blocking that right now is the filibuster in the United States Senate, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. So, you know,
yeah, I heard that.
We got to get out there. Yeah, we got to get out there and wake some folks up. Larry, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
My daily rant that I wrote yesterday afternoon and this morning and posted over at HartmannReport.com. The headline is "The Hidden Secret Behind the Arizona Ballot Counting." The subhead is "Republicans are channeling Joseph Stalin, who once suggested it doesn't matter who votes, what matters is who counts the votes." And of course, what I'm talking about is what's going on in Arizona right now. And apparently it's going to be happening soon in other states as well, where this private company that is run by some conspiracy nuts who have never audited an election before, are being brought in by hardcore Republican, right-wing Republicans, and given the ballots and asked to look them over and figure out if there was any fraud. And in Arizona, according to the only right-wing news, the only news network that is allowed inside the building is One America News, one of these far-right, you can't even call it a news network, it's a propaganda operation, on behalf of the billionaire class. And they're saying, well, we're looking at some preliminary evidence, or words to the effect of, looking at preliminary evidence of some hanky-panky here. There's something skeezy, some fraud. There's some history here, and you could say, oh, yeah, the Republicans, they're just trying to establish that, the Democrats are up to no good. The simple fact of the matter is, if you just grab some random Republican on the street and say, quick, tell me, how did Jack Kennedy win the 1960 election? 8 out of 10 of them, 4 out of 5 of them will say to you, Mayor Daley stole the election for him. Right? I mean, this is like revealed truth to Republicans. They all, right across the board. And I've been hearing this my whole entire life from Republicans. Jack Kennedy Mayor Daley stole the election for JFK in 1980 in Chicago. Well, it turned out that JFK beat Richard Nixon. He had 303 electoral votes, and Nixon had 219. So even if Kennedy had lost all of Illinois, forget Chicago, even if he'd lost the entire state, he still would have won the presidency. So it's BS on its face. But beyond that, the Republican Party started cranking this thing right after the election, before Jack Kennedy was inaugurated. They said, oh, Mayor Daley gave him the election in Chicago. And so they did an audit. And they found that, no, there were no bad votes. Everything was right. And so Kennedy gets sworn into office, and a few months later, the Republicans go at it again. Kennedy stole the election. Mayor Daley did it for him. And they did a second audit that the media observed. And sure enough, Kennedy won Illinois and Chicago. No surprise. But to this day, Republicans think Kennedy lost Chicago and therefore should not have become president, even though had he lost all of Illinois, he still would have become president. But they've got this thing in their heads. And there are some people who are saying, oh, that's what they're doing in Arizona right now. That's what they're trying to do. This isn't some part of some kind of big strategic long game. This is just sore loserdom. This is victimhood. This is something that the Republican Party, and frankly, there are Democrats, myself included, who have felt that there were some skeezy things going on with elections, like in 2000 when the Supreme Court basically handed the election to George W. Bush. I'm still thinking, we got robbed, of Al Gore being president. But nonetheless, let's just say that there are some people who think that right now what's going on with this recount in Arizona and soon to come to other states where it's not really a recount, there's no real press being allowed in, they're not following the rules of the state, et cetera. That what's going on is they're just trying to establish this narrative so that 60 years from now, just like 60 years, we're, 60 years on from the Kennedy election. And in fact, 80 years? Some incredible number of years. No, it must be like 60 years. And that 60 years from now, that Republicans will sit around and say, oh yeah, that Joe Biden became president, but he actually won the election in Arizona and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, and it was like Mayor Daley. But I don't think that's what's going on. Because the Republicans back in that time, Richard Nixon at first thought that there was some hanky-panky in the election. He was the one who was calling for the recount, which he got. But Richard Nixon never tried to pit Americans against each other. Richard Nixon didn't say, people with guns need to get out in the streets. Richard Nixon didn't invite thousands of people to the Capitol building to try to storm the Capitol during the counting of the electoral count of the electoral ballots. Richard Nixon actually supported the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and school integration, as did Dwight Eisenhower, who was the last Republican president. Richard Nixon was his vice president. It was the official position of that policy and of both those politicians to support those things. The racists of that time were not the GOP. There were certainly a lot of racists in the GOP, but the outspoken racists, that was Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond, and George Wallace. They were all Democrats. This was all pre-64, 65. So Richard Nixon, yeah, he was venal, he was corrupt, he took bribes, he did shakedowns, he was an anti-Semite, he was a racist, but he at least had the common courtesy. He at least cared enough about his country that when he lost an election, he stepped down. And he said, okay, I lost the election. Jack, I wish you well. And then he came back, 8 years later and won. Richard Nixon served his country. He volunteered for sea duty during World War II in the Pacific Theater, which could be a death sentence. Richard Nixon volunteered for that in uniform. Can you imagine Donald Trump or any member of the Trump family volunteering for military service? According to Trump, anybody who volunteers for military service is a sucker. What we are looking at now is nothing like the Kennedy-Nixon debate. What we are looking at right now is the Republican Party trying to invent fraud that they can use as justification for more and more draconian laws that change the way that we vote. And not just changing the way that we vote so that black people have to stay in line for 14 hours instead of just 10 hours. Or not just change the way that we vote so that you can't drop your ballot in a drop box, or you can't even get a ballot in the mail. You've got to show up in person. Not just that. But what they've already done in at least 2 states, in Georgia and I believe in Arizona or Idaho, and is on the, is being proposed now in over a dozen Republican states, is that the Secretary of State and the election professionals who year after year, basically bureaucrats who work for the government who are not political people, and make sure that the count is accurate. And everybody trusts them because everybody knows this is just what they do for a living. And it's all transparent. That those people are taken out of the process of counting votes and are being replaced by folks like this right-wing company run by conspiracy nuts who are, MAGA followers in Arizona that, as Georgia has done. The Secretary of State no longer certifies the election. It's now the legislature. And the legislature is controlled by Republicans. So they get to say, we're just going to throw out those votes from Atlanta. We don't like those. Nothing to stop them from doing that. What we are looking at right now is democracy itself, our republic, being torn down and replaced by an authoritarian form of government that more closely resembles Hungary or Turkey or Russia. That's what's going on. Those are the stakes. And the one thing standing in the way of that is H.R. 1, the For the People Act, now Senate Bill 1, which has passed the House of Representatives, and the only thing that's stopping it from passing the Senate is the filibuster. I'll tell you a little more about that on the other side of the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I got to share with you an email I got from FreedomWorks about this. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind?
Hey, I was just thinking about the speech that Biden's going to do tomorrow night in front of Congress, and they've said that they're going to limit it to like 225 people. So how do they determine who gets let in? Are they going to say you must wear a mask? If you can't wear a mask, you're not allowed in. If you can't wear it properly, you're not allowed in. If you remove it, you're going to be removed.
I don't know. Are you sure that's not 225 people beyond the 435 members of Congress?
I think they're going to. No, they're not allowing the entire Congress to sit in.
Oh,
it's going to be restrictive for spacing issues because of the virus.
Right.
And you know that not everyone's been inoculated. So to protect everyone.
Well, and half the Republican
older,
caucus refuses to even acknowledge whether they've been inoculated. Half of them.
So
it's mind-boggling.
You know, my question is, can they have some very tall, very strong people,
bouncers,
there at the door to maybe frisk them, make sure they're not carrying guns, you know, because they're such gun fanatics. We wouldn't want that in the room. And then also make sure that they know how to wear their mask, because if it's below their nose, they are kicked out. If it's not, available, they're kicked out. They're not allowed to even go in. Just set it up that way. If you can't follow the rules, you can't come in.
Well, we'll find out tomorrow, Sandra. It's you raised some interesting possibilities. I'm going to have to track down a story on this. I'm guessing the Washington Post is probably all over it. I had not been following that, but that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the tip.
All right.
I appreciate it. Good talking with you. Thank you, Sandra. Andrew in Seattle. Hey, Andrew, what's up?
Hi there, Tom. Hey, sorry, let me shut my door. Excuse me. Hey, so I just really wanted to put just a little light on the recent shootings of people that were killed just because of the color of their skin. I was listening to KBCS today, which is a wonderful radio station that's in my area, and all the people that are listening in from Washington. I really appreciate hearing everybody calling in. It's amazing to hear all the people from the area that care so much. But anyway, if you just got a second, like Isaiah Brown that got killed while he was holding a phone after he had just been driven by a police officer to his home. He got killed outside of his home, and they shot him because he was holding a cell phone. And Andrew Brown, who got pulled over and was holding his steering wheel, he got shot in the back. I don't even know. The family said that I'm sorry. This is kind of a content warning. They shot him. They don't even release how many times they shot at him while he was holding the steering wheel of his car. It's insane.
Apparently 14 bullets.
Bryant. They only showed them 20 seconds of one of the body cams that they had. It's crazy. And then Nakia Bryant got shot in the back 4 times by a police officer when she was defending herself against people that it was made pretty clear that she was scared for her life. And she got shot in the back. So I just wanted to shed a little bit of light on that today. So anyway, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Tom.
And sympathy for the families. Yeah, and thank you, Andrew. And this is my plaintive cry. When do we stop the slave patrol policing? I mean, it should have stopped 100 years ago. It damn well better stop now. Andrew, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Okay, just to finish up that rant that I was going into, my point is that the end game here is a very different end game than Richard Nixon in 1960. Back then, it was like, okay, let's just create a sense of victimhood, something that'll bring people together, a kind of shared mythology about how evil the Democrats are, so that we can all mutter to ourselves, over a beer at the local bar. What we're looking at now is an attempt to end our democratic republic and replace it with a strongman oligarchy. I wrote an entire book about this. It just came out a month or so ago, The Hidden History of American Oligarchy. It's about how we got here, literally from the founding of the republic, through the Confederacy, through the stages, through the Great Depression, and through the modern era, and where it's going. And right now, there are two things that are standing in the way of Republicans ending democracy in America, which they're already doing in some states. Look at what just happened in Georgia. Election professionals will no longer be counting the vote. It's going to be up to the Georgia legislature whether or not your vote gets counted. Now, we'll see if this stands with the current Supreme Court. It wouldn't surprise me if it does. But we are looking at the end of democracy. And the two things that are standing in the way, number one, public outrage. There's great groups like Fair Fight, Stacey Abrams' group out there. There's some great groups out there that are doing their best, Public Citizen, Indivisible, Progressive Democrats of America, and others who are really, fighting the good fight. And we need to do everything we can to amplify that public outrage. But public outrage is a fickle thing. If you get a major natural disaster, another police killing, just something that sucks up the headlines for 2 or 3 days, the Chauvin trial, for example, for 5 days, basically nothing else happened in America. In fact, it was a little more than 5 days. Then that public outrage over the loss of democracy kind of gets set to the side. The second thing that is stopping Republicans from ending democracy in America, or has the potential to stop them in their tracks, is the For the People Act, HB 1, SB 1, Senate Bill 1. It has passed the House of Representatives. It is sitting in the Senate, waiting to come out of committee so that Chuck Schumer can put it on the floor for a vote. I'm guessing that he's waiting for Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin to say that they will vote for it. And once they've got 50 votes, plus one with Kamala Harris, then the Republicans will filibuster it. And at that point, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are going to face a very difficult decision. But we've got to get there. And the way we get there is by you calling your senator at 202-224-3121. That's the main switchboard for the Capitol building. You just call in that number, 202-224-3121. Call that number and just say, I'd like to speak to the office of fill in the blank. Or I'm from Oregon. Who are my senators? Oh, Merkley and Wyden. Fine, I'll talk to Merkley. And they will connect you. And you can say, we have to have elections that we can trust. We have to have the For the People Act. We have to get dark money out of this. I got an email from FreedomWorks, the Koch-founded organization that brought us the Tea Party. They were bragging about how they put Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. It says, quote, we reached over 11 million activists in support of Justice Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation. In a matter of only a few weeks, FreedomWorks reached over 9.8 million Americans on Facebook, reached over 1.4 million on Instagram, generated 500,000 peer-to-peer text messages in 8 target states, and delivered 49,870 emails to the Senate, all in support of Barrett's confirmation of the U.S. Supreme Court. And now they're turning their efforts toward blocking the For the People Act, which they complain, quote, would require 501c4 organizations like FreedomWorks to expose the name of donors, leaving them vulnerable to the left's cancel culture mob attacks. Right. It is way beyond time that we clean up our elections in the United States, that people have absolute confidence in their elections in the United States. As I said, this piece today, and I encourage you to share it with your friends, it's titled The Hidden Secret Behind the Arizona Ballot Counting, and the hidden secret is that they're trying to end democracy. This isn't just about grievance. You can share it with anybody you'd like. It's free. There's no ads, whatever. It's all over at HartmannReport.com. And we've got to be calling. We've got to be calling our senators. 202-224-3121 is the phone number for the United States Senate switchboard. And you can ask them for any member. We have to be active on this. We have to. Our republic is hanging by a thread. Anyhow, we'll be back with your calls right after the break here at the bottom of the hour. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serfs, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the sun strikes, to this administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And picking up your phone calls here. Steve in Topanga, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. On my mind today is I want to see what you think about this. But, you know, what good are we if we're cured of the COVID virus, but we live under fascism and authoritarianism? And so my question to you is, shouldn't the Democrats move forward, kill the filibuster, get the country working for the people and not money? And, you know, the Democrats, you know, I believe they got to quit playing patty cake with the Republicans. They stop bringing a knife to a gunfight, for goodness sakes. You know, the only sure possibility we have is the next 2 years to get something done that actually is tangible for people. Because I got a friend that I've known since childhood, and he's total Trumper and everything. And I tried to talk to him, and after he got his stimulus, I said, you know, hey, Danny, what do you think? It's got to be a dilemma for you to get the stimulus money, you know, because I know you don't like Biden and all that kind of stuff. What are you going to do with it? And his answer was, I'm going to go out and buy a gun, and I'm going to come and shoot you, you commie. And so I've tried over and over to try to talk to him, and I'm just saying that for the Democrats to try to convince the Republicans to work with them and stuff, you know, they're going to do what they did with Obama, and they're going to say, "Oh, just do this and just tweak this here."
This is my point, Steve.
Anyway.
The Republican Party is not what it was when Richard Nixon was running for office in 1960. The Republican Party is a completely different thing.
Yes.
In my op-ed that I wrote over at HartmannReport.com today, I talked about. I didn't read the whole thing on the air. I talked about how my dad was a Republican in 1960 in that election. I was 9 years old, and my dad, agreed with Richard Nixon and Dwight Eisenhower that the Civil Rights Act was a good thing, that the Voting Rights Act was a good thing, that school desegregation was a good thing. That's what Republicans believed back then. And now the Republican Party is a bunch of fascists. The Republican Party, I mean, there are a few exceptions. It's hard to say that Liz Cheney is one of the exceptions because she's a neoconservative to begin with, but at least she's willing to stand up to open fascism, to Trumpism. But you've got an entire party now that has been captured by, my dad took me to a John Birch Society meeting. I read about this in the piece. And he said, you've got to see, these people are the real crazies. And his friend from the Model Railroad Club who took us was a member of the Michigan militia. And my dad said, these guys are the real crazies. They were the fringe. Now they're the party. That's my point.
Right. Well, here, the last thing is that, a lot of people think that the Democrats or the Republicans haven't really worked for the common man. And what I'm saying is the Democrats have a chance, Biden has a chance to be like Roosevelt and really do something and really bring back the middle class and tangibly show, the people that have been disenfranchised that it can work for them. And
I agree, but your entire argument, Steve, hangs on having 50 votes to overturn the filibuster.
That's why the filibuster
right now you've got two senators, Sinema and Manchin, who are saying, I don't know about this.
Well, we need a Lyndon Johnson shakeup on these guys.
I'm not sure exactly what it's going to take, but I increasingly believe that between Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden, two politicians who 2 years ago I would have told you I have, very little faith in because I saw them just as, you look up corporate Democrat in the dictionary and there they are. But it's increasingly looking to me like these guys are actually, wanting to get things done, willing to get things done. They're awake to the changing America. And, whether it's going to take, putting Manchin's arm behind his back, bending his arm, or whether it's going to take, dangling a bridge in front of him with his name on it, I don't know the answer. But we've got to get there. Steve, thank you for the call. Alejandro in Miami. Hey, Alejandro, what's up?
I'm just shocked with the whole thing you said about Tucker Carlson actually encouraging his followers to report parents who have kids with masks. I mean, how stupid can that be? I mean, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. And I'm just thinking, you know what? I dare them to do it because here's why. If they're claiming that kids with masks are child abuse, that's false. That's a false police report because no reasonable person would actually think that. So if they're going to call and waste police resources on this, they should get arrested for this. I mean, they should be charged with a crime because
I'm
that's
with
falsely, filing a police report. So yeah,
I'm with you.
Go commit illegal acts like idiots.
Yeah, and I believe that Tucker Carlson has gone beyond the limits of free speech and is beginning anyway to tread into that, yelling fire in a crowded theater territory where, at the very least, he's doing something wrong, and beyond that, arguably it's committing a crime. Mike in Charlotte, South Carolina. Hey, Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, I think we have a situation where we need to expand our energy sources that we have, but at the same time, we don't want to be penalizing people who use cars to drive and make gas prices more expensive for everybody, further make the cost of living more expensive for people that are driving. And the situation here with the hostility, you've got lunatics on both sides, and we need to get the police forces rid of any people that have either they can't use common sense to pull a gun or taser, or they get any inkling of racism or this Napoleon attitude a lot of the police have. They want to just kind of just boss people around, and it's unnecessary. Some of the stuff they're doing, and it's downright just dehumanizing and ridiculous what's been going on with some of the stuff. But to sit there and be demonizing white people and trying to make Republicans, look bad when they have different opinions on the environment and such, it doesn't help the discussion here. We need to have a sound policy of getting rid of pollution, plant more trees, but to sit there and call carbon dioxide a pollutant is insane. One volcano that occurs in Iceland could basically cover...
Carbon dioxide is a pollutant. Volcanoes have been happening forever. We are dumping hundreds of billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It is poisoning people, Mike. And if you can name one single Republican policy, one single law that Republicans have passed that was proposed by a Republican, that was passed by a Republican, majority of Republican legislators, and signed by a Republican president, you win the prize. Because I can't find anything Republicans have done ever since Reagan in the last 40 years that didn't purely benefit rich people or giant corporations. Do you have an example?
Yeah. I think George Bush passed some policies back there for the Clean
Name
Water
one.
Act and such like that. Okay, but you're talking about
the Healthy Forests Initiative and the Clear Skies initiatives that were passed by George W. Bush both allowed increased levels of pollution. That's why they had those phony baloney names on them. Mike, you can argue that by my saying that the Republican Party has become a fascist party and that they have for 40 years not been working on behalf of the American people. You can say that I'm being a demagogue. I just gave you an opportunity, and I'll give you all the opportunities you want to prove me wrong, but I don't think you can do it.
I'm not crazy about the Republican Party either. Okay, let's get that straight. It's a lot of feed my back pocket politics going on. Same thing in the Democrats when the Obama administration was in power. How much waste money went into green energy projects?
It is not the same thing with the Democrats.
Yes,
there are corrupt Democratic politicians, just like there are corrupt Republican politicians. But the Democratic Party brought us Social Security. The Republican Party fought it. The Democratic Party brought us Medicare. The Republican Party fought it. The Democratic Party brought us Medicaid. The Republican Party fought it. The Democratic Party brought us child labor laws. The Republican Party fought it. The Democratic Party brought us the right to unionize. The Republican Party fought it. The Democratic Party brought us food stamps. The Republican Party fought it. The Democratic Party brought us free college tuition. The Republican Party fought it and ultimately reversed it. The Democratic Party brought us free public education. The Republican Party fought it and has gutted our public education systems. The Democratic Party brought us the Clean, Pure Food Act and Drug Acts. The Republican Party fought it and are continuing to try to deregulate these industries. The Democratic Party brought us clean air. The Republican Party fought it. You cannot identify any single policy in the last 40 years that the Republican Party, and I take it back to the 1930s, frankly. Okay, well, it sure sounded like you were. I'm telling you, Mike, you are well, if you want to reduce gas prices, go with a program where we put a carbon tax on and 100% of that money goes back to the people who are driving the cars. And that program is well established. There are ways to do that don't hurt anybody, Mike.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
That don't hurt anybody except, the Koch brothers and other oil barons who are kind of rich to begin with. Charles, anyway. David's gone. We'll be back. And welcome back. And Paul in Puyallup, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Good morning, sir. Talking about police qualifications, recruitment. Entry-level police officers take an entrance exam or just a basic exam, and just by virtue of that exam, most of them have college education, and they typically seek higher education during their career. And I'd like to make a point that I worked in public safety for 30 years and worked a lot with police officers. Most of them are really good people with good intentions. And I know kind of the theme is to bash the police and defund the police. They're having more and more difficulties recruiting these good people because of this atmosphere and, of course, the difficulty of the job. I think many of your listeners have no idea what they face on a daily basis, and especially at night when they're safe sleeping in their beds, the bad people that they deal with. Most law-abiding people don't have interactions with the police. You know, you want to do drugs, you want to operate a vehicle under drugs, you want to do illegal activity, you're going to have an interaction with the police. And I think most of us will be glad that they're out there taking care of it. Another one of your callers and their topic was a national
Paul, may I respond to what you just said?
Yes.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. And, you know, I, as a graduate of the Georgia Police Academy, I can tell you, there are some extraordinary people who are and want to be police officers. There are also some real asses, and I've met them. And if you've worked with cops, you've met them too. And my concern with our police departments is not the level of education. That's not my hobby horse. It's the authoritarian tendencies. It is possible, there are ways to identify people who are authoritarians. And we have way too many authoritarians in our police departments, people who you know, basically are seeking power as a way to provide personal safety, and they abuse that power, and we've got to do something about that. Number one. Number two, we got to get racist cops out of the way.
And the recruitment is the other topic I'd like to address. I was working in a joint training. I was in fire service. Joint training with the cops, and they were interviewing for entry-level police position. And I talked to the sergeant in charge of that, and he was just so frustrated. He says, Paul, I've interviewed 25 people today. None of them are qualified to be a police officer. I have no idea why they're even here. So the recruitment is very difficult, and they certainly do not want to lower their standards to fill vacant positions. But unfortunately,
well, the problem, Paul, is that there's no they. I mean, you may be describing one particularly good police department and one particularly good police sergeant, but there are places in America where it is very much not particularly good.
And I do. I live in a place where there's a very high standard, and there is a national certification for both police and fire.
Right. And this is why the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is so important, is because it simply establishes some very, very minimal national standards that virtually all police departments in the United States should be able to conform to fairly quickly. But we've got to have some kind of national standards. Paul, I got to run. I'm sorry. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? You know, the last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Alvin in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Hey, Alvin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. It's great talking to you. It's the first time I've called into your show, and I love your show.
Thank you.
I share the frustration about Joe Manchin. That wasn't the reason why I called, but it must be said considering where I am. But one of the things I wanted to mention was, I heard about Tucker Carlson's comment. And it just made me cringe, but also, I'm an African-American survivor of police brutality, and I've had a number of these false 911 calls made on me. I understand what that's about and the waste of police resources and how things can go very wrong. And Tucker Carlson, he's doing this, and this is just one more example of why we do need legislation that deals with people who abuse 911. 911 is not there to help you out socially because you can't cope, or with, someone of a different race because you can't cope. And that's kind of what this falls into. We've got these names, Karen, Kens, whatever else, and these names have gone through decade over decade. And now here we are today, and now you got Tucker Carlson trying to line people up to do it even more. Something's wrong. And that's the kind of behavior that needs to be legislated.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Alvin. And there are states that have passed, laws that make it illegal to abuse 911. But I think there's a larger issue here that nobody in the media is willing to say because it requires a certain logical leap and a certain conclusion of bad faith on Tucker's part that people are unwilling to say. And I'm going to say it. I'm not going to assert that it's true. I'm not going to assert that I know what's in his heart. But one thing that we know now that we didn't know 2 months ago is that now, 2 months ago, we believed that African Americans were more likely to be hesitant about getting the vaccine and presumably, therefore, also more hesitant to wear a mask. What we know now is that African Americans are actually far more likely to get the vaccine and far more likely to use the mask and far more likely to be well informed about the actual dangers and the actual ways to avoid COVID than is the case for white people, particularly rural area white people. And so I think you could build an argument, and I'm not, well, what the hell? I am building the argument that when Tucker Carlson goes on national TV and says to his almost exclusively white audience, it's time to start calling 911 on people who are wearing masks, he is giving them permission for one more reason, and now, a giant one, to call the cops basically on black people who are wearing masks. What do you think?
And that's part of the through line. That's part of my through line there. The first time I put a mask on and went into a store, I had to stop and think about what I was doing. I don't wear hoodies into stores. I don't carry bags into stores. I don't use those automated checkouts. Now I'm going to wear a mask. And for some, it went very poorly at the very beginning. And so, I see those through lines, but it's just one more reason why we do need some better legislation, federal and state-wise around some of these behaviors that we clearly see through social media. Smartphones now have, surfaced this. It was always there, but now you can see it, an example, and what you see there as well. I mean, you make a very good point. It's one more reason for someone who wants to behave that way that they now have in their quiver, and they're going to come if someone says, I think it's child abuse. They're going to come.
Oh, and then having worked in that system, I can tell you that once somebody has even a phone call about child abuse, that doesn't go off their record. No conviction, right? The investigation can clear them. But the second time somebody calls, this person has already had one child abuse report. That kind of stuff lingers, and that kind of stuff can lead to your door being kicked in. That kind of stuff can lead to your children being taken away. That stuff can lead to all kinds of god-awful stuff. Alvin, I have to move along, but thank you. Thank you for bringing it all up and in a way that we could just clearly talk about it. Thank you. Vincent in Carson City, Nevada. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Yeah, I was going to call yesterday about your talk there about restaurants, calling restaurants to require a vaccination, basically no vaccination, no service. That was brilliant. I love that. But I also
Thank you. Make some phone calls.
Yeah. Today, though, there was a guy who objected to Fox and News. I think I agree with him. You should say Fox Noise from now on, because it's truly noise, and it's white noise, actually, and the white noise is never wanted. They always filter that out because it interferes with the signal. and so Fox should definitely be filtered
But to your
out.
point, Vincent, we have 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Was that your point?
I was just going to agree with that guy about Fox News. Always
Fox
say
Noise.
Fox Noise.
Yeah, or like I said, for a decade I've called it Fox so-called news, which I think also makes the point. Vincent, thank you. Thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. New CDC guidelines, you can walk around without a mask outdoors. I'm still going to at least keep one down below my chin, and if I get near anybody, I'm going to pull it up. We'll know more about this, and we can talk more about this tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and those around you. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
It's time for America to go back to the future of true greatness created by people united to build.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Thank you.